All right, let's get our boots on and head out on this deep dive, folks. Today we're trekking into Grand Portage National Monument.
You know, it's not just a monument, right? It's this incredible 8.5-mile trail, too, like a straight-up path through the wilderness. It used to be the route for the fur trade back in the day.
Oh yeah, we're talking old-school voyagers hauling like 90 pounds of fur on their backs, connecting the Great Lakes all the way up to like the Canadian Northwest.
Exactly. A real historical highway, except, well, no pavement, more like mud, mosquitoes, and uphill battles all the way.
Right. And get this, even before those fur traders got there, the Ojibwe people had already been using this area for travel and trade for like at least 2,000 years.
Yeah, so we're talking layers upon layers of history here.
For sure. And we've got a whole bunch of sources to help us dig into it. Wikipedia, the National Park Service website, even some cool tourism sites, and a YouTube video about the rendezvous celebration they have.
Really gets you into the vibe of the place.
Totally. Okay, so let's hit the trail, shall we? This 8.5-mile thing, you can actually hike it today. Imagine what those voyagers went through.
Seriously. It starts at Lake Superior, about 600 feet up, then climbs through the Sawtooth Mountains.
Sawtooth. Sounds intense.
It gets up to 1,300 feet. Must have been some view, though.
Oh, I bet. And wait, Wikipedia says it even goes across a beaver pond. Like, right on the trail.
No kidding. Talk about an obstacle course.
Seriously. So this trail was tough, right? But what made Grand Portage so important that people would even do all that?
Well, it was all about location, location, location. Grand Portage was the link between Montreal and the fur paradise of the Canadian Northwest. Think of it like a giant fur trading hub.
So it was like the central point for all those furs.
Exactly. And there were two main groups of voyagers involved. The Northmen, they called them, or winterers. They were the ones braving the Canadian winters, trading with Native Americans for all those furs.
So like the real adventurers, huh?
Yeah, and then you had the Montreal men. They'd show up in the spring.
Bringing supplies and hauling the furs back east.
Right on, and every year they'd all meet up at Grand Portage for this huge event, the rendezvous.
And from what I read, it wasn't all business. It sounds more like a wild party mixed with some serious trading.
You got it. The park archives describe it as this massive gathering with bonfires, storytelling, competitions, you name it. Singing, drinking, and, well, apparently a few brawls here and there.
Oh yeah, those long winters probably led to some pent-up energy. Our sources even mention how the Northmen were super resourceful, some even sleeping under their canoes to save money.
Makes sense. They were in it for the long haul. And then you had the Montreal men, nicknamed pork eaters. Fancy lads preferred tents.
Pork eaters, that's a new one. Must have been a difference in lifestyle between the two.
Definitely. The pork eaters sound like they lived a bit more comfortably, having that connection back to Montreal and all its supplies probably added to those clashes we read about.
I bet it did. Sounds like those rendezvous gatherings were a mix of personalities and cultures, fueled by, well, maybe a little too much celebrating. But before we get too caught up in the fur trade, let's talk about the Ojibwe people. They were here way before any fur traders.
Oh, for sure. They're a huge part of the Grand Portage story. They'd been using this route for travel for at least 2,000 years, long before Europeans even knew about it.
And it wasn't just a convenient route for them, right? It was connected to their whole culture and spirituality.
Totally. And in 1854, they even officially made Grand Portage part of their reservation through a treaty with the U.S.
It was their homeland, not just a path through the woods.
Right. Unfortunately, though, like a lot of treaties, it didn't protect them from settlers moving in. A few decades later, the reservation was abolished and the Ojibwe way of life was disrupted.
It's tough to hear about that part of history.
Yeah, but here's a bit of a brighter spot. In 1999, there was this landmark agreement that made Grand Portage the very first National Park Service unit co-managed with a tribal nation.
Wow, a first. So they have a say in how this land is managed now.
Exactly. And you know, just like the fur traders had their rendezvous, the Ojibwe have their annual powwow, which happens right alongside the rendezvous reenactment these days. It's like this beautiful blend of past and present.
That's really cool. So it's not just about remembering history, it's about keeping those traditions alive.
Exactly. Grand Portage isn't frozen in time. It's a living, breathing place where history and culture are constantly intertwining.
Love that. Okay, so we've got this epic trail, a fur trade hub, and the Ojibwe story woven into it all. Let's time travel a bit now and see how Grand Portage brings all this history to life for visitors today.
You know what really brings that history to life? That YouTube video from Visit Cook County MN, the one with the rendezvous and powwow.
Oh yeah, that was awesome. Seeing those reenactors all dressed up, the crowds, the energy, it really felt like stepping back in time.
I know, right? And what's cool is they have both events, the rendezvous and the powwow, happening at the same time. Each one celebrates a different part of Grand Portage's story.
So, like, the rendezvous is all about that fur trade era, and the powwow is more about the Ojibwe culture today.
Exactly. The rendezvous, it's like a total immersion experience. They have workshops on traditional crafts, contests, and of course the reenactors playing the voyageurs and traders. It's super authentic.
I was impressed by those guys paddling the canoes and hauling those packs. Like, they weren't just messing around. They were really trying to show how tough it was back then.
Oh, yeah. And then right next to all that, you have the powwow. It's all about celebrating Ojibwe culture with dancing, singing, and gatherings from different tribes. Really shows how those traditions are still going strong today.
And did you know the rendezvous usually happens during the Perseid meteor shower? Imagine that, all that history and culture under a sky full of shooting stars.
Talk about magical. And in 2016, they even had a tall ship there for the National Park Service's 100th anniversary.
Wait, a real tall ship, like an old-timey sailing ship? How'd they even pull that off?
Well, back in the 1700s, the Northwest Company used those kinds of ships on Lake Superior, so it was kind of like bringing a piece of their history back. They even offered boat rides for people to check it out.
That's amazing. Sounds like they really went all out. But what if you can't make it to Grand Portage during the rendezvous? Can you still experience the history?
Oh, definitely. The Heritage Center is open year-round. They've got exhibits, multimedia stuff, even archives if you want to really dig in.
Cool, so something for everyone. And what about those reconstructed buildings? Could you see those anytime?
Those are open daily from late May to mid-October. You can walk through the Great Hall, the kitchen, even the Ojibwe Village exhibit. It's like stepping back in time.
I can imagine. And of course, you can always hike the Grand Portage Trail itself, right? All year round. In the winter, they even use it for cross-country skiing.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome, but gotta be prepared though. No modern facilities out there.
Right, safety first. You know, I was reading that each of the corner rooms in the Great Hall is decorated to show a different part of the fur trade.
Oh yeah, those rooms are amazing. There's one like a shareholder's bedroom, another's a trading post with furs and goods, even a London street scene to show what they did with all those furs.
Wow, talk about attention to detail. And get this, a lot of what we know about how those buildings looked originally comes from archaeology.
Yeah, they've been doing excavations at Grand Portage since the 1930s. Every time they dig, they find more clues about how it all worked back then.
It's like a giant historical puzzle. Makes you wonder what else is still buried there.
Right. That's part of what makes it so fascinating. History isn't just in books. It's right there under our feet, waiting to be discovered.
Makes you want to grab a shovel and start digging. But even without that, there's so much to see and experience at Grand Portage.
Totally. You can walk in the footsteps of those voyageurs, see those buildings come to life, and really connect with the Ojibwe history.
It's a real reminder that history isn't just something we read about. It's all around us. We've talked about Grand Portage being this like super busy place, right? But what happened with the fur trade died down? Did everyone just pack up and leave?
Pretty much. In the early 1800s, as the fur trade declined, Grand Portage became, well, kind of deserted. The Northwest Company, they were a big deal in the fur business, moved their headquarters north to Fort William.
So all those buildings, all that action from the rendezvous, just gone.
Yeah, it was like a ghost town. Quiet, almost forgotten for a long time.
Until, it seems, history made a comeback. When did Grand Portage start to get noticed again?
Well, in the early 1900s, people got really interested in history and preserving old places, and Grand Portage, with all its stories, started to attract attention.
Like a hidden treasure being rediscovered. Resources say the Minnesota Historical Society was the first to really push for protecting it.
Yeah, back in the 1920s, they saw its value and wanted to make it a state park, but there was a catch. The land belonged to the Grand Portage Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa.
Ah, so it wasn't that simple. So how did it end up becoming a national monument?
The federal government got involved. They realized how important the site was nationally. And in the 1930s, the Civilian Conservation Corps, they had this Indian division. They came to Grand Portage, started clearing the old trail, and importantly, they did the first archaeological digs there.
Those early digs must have been amazing, like revealing the secrets of the past.
Totally. They found the foundations of the original buildings, which helped them figure out how to reconstruct things like the Great Hall. Those discoveries really brought the history back to life.
And then a big moment happened in 1960. The Grand Portage Band agreed to give almost 710 acres of their land to the U.S. government so they could create Grand Portage National Monument.
A pretty incredible decision. They recognized the importance of preserving the site, not just for themselves, but for everyone.
Shows how much they value sharing this history. But our sources mentioned that the relationship between the band and the National Park Service wasn't always perfect, right?
Yeah, in the beginning, the focus was mostly on the European fur traders. The Ojibwe perspective wasn't really given as much attention.
So it took some time and effort from the Grand Portage Band to make sure their story was included.
Definitely, they were key in pushing for a more balanced view of Grand Portage, one that acknowledged the impact of the fur trade on their people.
Which leads us to that 1999 co-management agreement, a game changer in how the band and the Park Service work together.
Yeah, that was huge. Grand Portage became the first National Park Service unit co-managed with a tribal nation.
A real model for how to do things right, and you can see that shared responsibility all over Grand Portage, especially at the Heritage Center.
For sure. The Heritage Center showcases both the fur trade and the Ojibwe side of things. It's a place where you can learn about different perspectives and get a more complete picture of Grand Portage.
It all comes back to that question about how we view the fur trade today. Grand Portage doesn't hide the good and the bad, the impact it had on everyone involved.
It's a place that makes you think, challenges you to see things from different angles. It's not just about the past, it's about learning from it.
So if you're looking for an adventure with history, nature, and culture all rolled into one, Grand Portage is calling your name.
Go hike that trail, explore those buildings, and immerse yourself in the stories of the voyagers, the traders, and especially the Ojibwe people.
Let Grand Portage remind you that history is alive, waiting to be discovered. Who knows, you might even make a discovery of your own. Well, folks, that's our deep dive into Grand Portage National Monument.
Until next time, keep exploring.
And keep diving deep.